First question we need to ask ourselves is what type of animal are we dealing with? Because all will come with different risks, different behavioural characteristics and different needs. And what we've done is we've categorised the species groups into 5 distinct areas. That's domestic, equine, livestock, exotic and wildlife. Categorising these animals into groups will help us to have an understanding of the basic needs of that species type. But it's also really important to understand the context in which that animal is found or is kept routinely, and also the numbers that are involved in an incident, because that may have a direct bearing on the way that we resource it and manage the incident. Historically, animal rescues were categorised in 2 areas, large and small. And the way that that was defined was really whether you could pick up an animal with one person or whether you needed more than one person or mechanical advantage. And therefore, many of our animal rescue teams through the fire service have been developed on the basis of lifting a heavy animal. But that really didn't take into account the species-specific needs of an animal involved in an incident. And what we've got to understand is the context in which we find them. So for instance, when we're thinking about risk, if you encounter a domestic dog that's a companion animal, if it's injured or if it's trapped or if it's scared, yes, it will have risks associated with it, but not the same as if we encountered a domestic canine that had a role, for instance, in the security sector or as a guarding dog, because that will have breed characteristics and trained aggression that we will need to manage. And so the 2 situations are very, very different. And that's why it's really important that you understand the species involved, but you also understand the context in which they're found. It could be a legal implication for us as emergency responders. For instance, some animals fall into the category of non-indigenous species, and this is largely in our wildlife population. So if we go to an incident where there's a trapped deer, for instance, if it's a muntjac deer, it may actually be illegal for us to release it, and we may need to seek specialist advice on what we do with that animal. So again, the context that we find it in, the type of species is really, really important. Some animals we will find in heavily populated areas where there's a high human risk level. Shows and events, sporting events for instance, another good example. So again, you may find an animal in a species type that you may think you know how to deal with, put it into a different situation, different context, and it may pose different risks. Before we delve any deeper into the subject, now's a good time to just stop and just think about the types of animals that you may encounter in your operational area and the context in which you might find them. And this is a really useful exercise for thinking about the site-specific risks that you might encounter or need to take into account ahead of any incident occurring. So in your groups or individually, just jot down some ideas around those species groups, the numbers of animals you might find and the context that you might find them in.